Super Rugby Pacific round 3 is upon us. The lineups are out. I'm going to share with you my best picks for this round. Before we jump into the players though, let's have a quick look at the fixtures. The fixtures I really want to target this week are the Chiefs versus the Brumbies and the Reds versus the Force. I really think the Chiefs are going to give the Brumbies a real bollocking this weekend. A lot of points should be scored by Chiefs players, I hope. Same with the Reds versus the Force as well. This is in Perth at HBF Park. It's a home game for the Force. I do like the look of the Reds this year though. A lot of their players really stood out last week. They were fantasy machines. I'm liking them again this week in this matchup. With the other matchups though, there's still a lot on offer. I mean, Tars versus Drua, anything could happen there. Could be a lot of points going both ways. Highlanders versus Pacifica, home game for Moana, but it's at the North Shore. Will be interesting to see how much support they actually get there. And the Highlanders, they're coming off that huge win against the Blues last week. I think they'll be fired up. I think there'll still be a lot of points on offer here, but I would also be favouring Highlanders players. And with Hurricanes versus the Blues, not sure how I feel about this match. Canes, they've played quite open this year, had some dodgy defence, had some serious points scored against them. With the Blues, they're just looking really out of sorts. They can't get their game going the same way they did last year. Could be a lot of points that's scored in this game, but probably not. I mean, it's hard to tell. We'll have to wait and see. Not my favored matchup for this week, as you'll see reflected in my team. Anyway, jumping into the players, we'll start with the props. We're going position by position. And with the props, it's really just much of a muchness. I keep saying this every week. It's not a high scoring position. You can see here at most these props, they get about 30 points. I mean, if you're lucky, maybe the one you pick, he gets a try that week, but these props, they're not consistent try scorers. It's going to be hard to pick that, so don't sweat this decision. Don't spend too much time on it. If you are managing to hit your salary cap somehow, this is a good place to save some money just by picking some cheaper starters. Only thing you ever really need to check with prop is to see if Taitua Lima at the Brumbies is starting that given round. He isn't starting this week. He's actually a back rower, but in fantasy he's classed as a prop for some reason. Not an issue this week, but definitely something to keep in mind for the future. For my props, I've gone with Angus Bell and Tom Robertson from the Force. Angus Bell, he's coming back this week. He's starting. Don't forget the Waratahs, they didn't play last week. They had the bye. They're back this week. Don't forget to check them out. I like a lot of what Angus Bell does around the park. I think he's solid for points. I've given up on Xavier Numere. I really liked how he played last year. He's so busy around the park. He makes carries, he does tackle busts, he can get some offload, but it just hasn't been happening this year. Maybe if the Hurricanes came good, if they get some of their guys back from injury, maybe he'll be another option going forward, but I've just given up on him for now. And a lot of people, they've been picking Ethan de Groot. If you have picked de Groot, just realize that this week he is actually on the bench, even though fantasy says he's starting. You can see here at the moment, 32% of people do have him picked. Don't make this mistake. He is on the bench. He will not get a lot of game time this week. If you're not sure who to go with, you can always go with these Force props, Tom Robertson, Pierce. Both of them just seem to make a lot of tackles. They seem to be really solid. They're probably going to be making tackles against the Reds this week as well. You can't go wrong there. Now moving on to the locks. Similar story with the locks as with the props. It's really just not a high scoring position. I've gone with Tupou Vaa'i just because I really think that he's busy around the park, both sides of the ball. In theory, the way he plays, he should be good for points. Hasn't really proven out so far, but we'll see what happens going forward. My other lock, Nasila Silla. He was good last week. Really liked the look of him. Got decent points, and I also don't mind that Druas v Tars matchup. I think there could be a lot of points scored in that game, so quite like that option. Otherwise, another one I consider would probably be Ryan Smith at the Reds, because again, I just like that Reds versus Force matchup. And next we have the back rows. This is the first position where there's really a lot of choice to be made, and these back rowers, they score decent points as well, so definitely something to put more thought into. The big name this week, and last week for that matter, is Fraser McWright. The Reds, they had their first game last week against Pacifica. Fraser McWright, he looked so good both sides of the ball. He was getting turnovers, he was making tackles, he was making line breaks with the ball. Really excellent player. Also excellent for fantasy as well. As you can see, the highest scoring back rower on 71 points. This guy, I think, is as close as you get to a must pick. And the Reds, they're going up against the Force this weekend. That's another great opportunity for all their players to get a lot of points on the board in the game and in fantasy as well. My next pick is Parker for the Chiefs. I really like this Chiefs versus Brumbies matchup. I really do think the Chiefs are just going to give them a bollocking in Hamilton. And just in general, I really like number 8 in fantasy at the moment. They seem to score a bit better than the other back row positions when it comes to fantasy. Probably, being on the back end of those scrums, being the big guys, they probably just in general score more tries than the other back rowers. Parker, he was super solid last week. Hoping he'll be solid again. Kalen Boshia is on the bench for the Chiefs. He's a 7 as well. That means Parker, he should not get replaced this week. He should get the full 80 minutes. That's more opportunity for him to score points. That's what I'm looking for. And my third pick, it is Hoskins Sotutu from the Blues. Probably not a common pick the way things have been going this year for fantasy and for the Blues. But this is a bit of a faith pick for me. Hoskins Sotutu, he was huge last year. Obviously, he was Super Rugby Player of the Year. But just if you looked at his stats last year, he was just dominating pretty much every category. Offloads, meters, tries, try assists, even line-out takes. He's the Blues' #1 line-out reception. He really is just a stats machine. And the Blues, they've been really struggling this year. Maybe he will struggle to benefit in fantasy because of that as well. Didn't get a huge score last week, only about 30 or so points. But it is the Hurricanes this week. It should be a more open game, I suspect. Not 100% sure. We'll have to wait and see. So you don't have to go with my Sotutu pick, but I'm thinking the Blues will turn it around. I think Hoskins will benefit from that, and I want to be there on the ground floor when that happens. Other options to look at though, if we look at the most selected back rowers, Duplessis Karifi is at the top. I don't actually love this pick. Karifi, he is so good. If you're watching the game last week, he was a force. Even though he got carded, when he came back on, he really changed the game. He was immense, but he just doesn't get a lot of points to show for the work he actually puts in and how good his performance actually is for his team. And with the Hurricanes in general, I also was quite bullish on Braden Iose for the season, but he also just hasn't really scored a lot of points. Decent score last week, 37, slightly padded out by the one try he picked up. I kind of like him because, like Sotutu, he's really busy. Like last year, he was dominating a lot of stats category. It's just not happening this year. Maybe it's because the Hurricanes don't look as good, but he's still one I'm keeping an eye on. And another thing while we're on the matter of the Hurricanes is that Peter Lakai, he is actually getting a start this week. He is not coming off the bench. He will get some serious minutes this week, so he's one to think about if you happen to like the Hurricanes or this Canes versus Blues matchup. Another player who was really huge last week was Charlie Cale for the Brumbies. 70 points in that game. He did not play in round 1, but he was so good in the last round. Got 2 tries. He was a force last year as well. He really racked up the points. I do think he's one to keep an eye on, but I did not pick him this week because I do not like that Brumbies matchup against the Chiefs. I do think the Brumbies will struggle in that game. Therefore, I don't think Kale will go as well. Miracle Failangi is also another one to consider as well. Moana, they do have a home game. It is on the North Shore in Auckland. They're playing against the Highlanders. it should be a pretty open game and a good opportunity for him to get some points. He is really good ball in hand. Outside of that, Carlo Tizzano, he remains really solid, just a tackle machine. Can't go wrong with him. He will continue to get solid points. And the last one I think you should also give serious consideration as well is Thanakai Vada. I mean, this guy, he is a machine. He's a beast. He's the 8 for the draw. And I do like this match that they have coming up against the Waratahs. The draw, they are playing away. Normally they play pretty poorly when they're away from home, but we just saw it against the Hurricanes in Napier. They weren't actually that bad. They almost took that game, so might not go too bad against the Waratahs in Sydney. And Thanakai Vada, if anyone's going to get points, it could be this guy. Definitely one to consider. Moving on to 9s and 10s. Really hard to get away from Roigard and McKenzie in these spots. For halfback though, I think this week there is a serious option to consider in Folau Fakatava. The Highlanders, they are taking on the Pacifica. There should be some points on offer for them there. Pacifica defense, it's not that great. And Folau Fakatava, he's a guy who likes to play ball in hand. He likes to snipe around the edges of the rucks. That can lead to offloads, to line breaks, that can lead to fantasy points. So I would give him serious consideration. Roigard, I mean, he was so amazing last week. It's just so hard to get away from him. I mean, that was a close match as well, but I think he was one of the top point scorers for the round, got that 85-point haul. In fact, I think he was the top scorer for the round. It did include one try, but I mean, look at all of these try assists. Like, even in a tough matchup, it's just really hard to get away from Roigard, and I won't be doing it this week. I will be keeping an eye on Folau Fakatava to see how he goes though. At 10, really hard to look away from DMAC just because they're taking on the Brumbies at home this week, and again, I really like that matchup. I think DMAC will do really well in this game. I'll probably be making him my captain as well. That's how much I believe in him for this game. And really, what are your other options? The only other guy really worth looking at is Willie Havili, and he is playing at home this week against the Highlanders. Should be an open game. Won't be a bad option, but I just don't think he's going to be beating DMAC this week. In the midfield, really hard to go past Quinn Tupaia this week. He had that massive game last week, his first start, his 50th game, got those 2 tries, was all over the place. And midfield, it's a category where the players, they really struggle to get fantasy points. Not Tupaia though, had that huge haul, 98 points against the Crusaders, and that was still coming off the bench as well. He really seems like he's going to be a must pick for this week at least. Maybe that was just a one-off. We'll have to see what happens, but I'm not going to take that chance. Other options here, Anton Leonard-Brown. You could double down on the Chiefs if you really like that matchup like I do. Another one I like is Taniela Talia at the Highlanders versus Pacifica. He's a ball runner, he can make breaks, and that Pacifica defense, it is quite dodgy. One problem he has though, he has Tavatava Nawai inside him. Tavatava Nawai, he does like to play a lot. He's also kicking a lot at the moment. That does mean he doesn't get all the ball that we probably want him to if you're picking him. And speaking of Tavatava Nawai, a lot of people are picking him because he's just playing out of his skin at the moment. But the problem is he's really just not getting a lot of fantasy points for his efforts. You don't get any points in this game for all those 50-22. So while he's still a solid option, I don't think you're going wrong by picking him. He's not necessarily a must pick either. But otherwise, there's really not a lot of other options that really stand out as being great. I've gone with Tabua Vo because he makes a lot of tackles, so that seems to be a good base for scoring for a midfielder. That means that he'll be solid. And I do like that Drua versus Tars game. I do think that Drua could score some points in that. And hopefully Tabua Vo, he could be the beneficiary of that in fantasy. Another thing to remember is that even though the Tars are back this week, there is no Joseph Suali'i. Some other guys I considered were fluke for the Reds. I picked him last week. He really didn't get anything coming his way in a game where the Reds scored 50 points. He didn't get a lot of fantasy points for that. The Reds, they're taking on the Force. I expect them to go well. Maybe Fluke will benefit. Maybe he won't like last week. Another thing to remember is that Paisami, he is actually out this week, so it will be a different center pairing there. That may help or hinder Fluke. I'm not 100% sure. Another guy I was looking for was Danny Tawala. He has been promoted to a start for Pacifica, but for some reason he does not seem to be listed in fantasy, so he's not a player we can choose. And lastly, we come to the big guns, the outside backs. These are the guys that are going to be scoring your serious points. I've gone with Kyron Taumoi Falau. He's been talked about a lot. He's been so good in the first 2 games. He's super athletic. He's scoring tries. He's fast. Really hard to look past him. It's hard to look past these guys who are getting a lot of points even in losing efforts. And I think against the Highlanders, that's not going to be the toughest game for them all year either. So Taumoi Falau, he should go on to score more points in this game as well, just like he did in the first 2 rounds. Very close to a must pick, if not a must pick. The next pick I like is Filippo Daugunu. Again, the Reds, they're playing against the Force. I really like that matchup for the Reds. I think they'll win comfortably and score some points while they're at it. And we saw Daugunu, he was the beneficiary last week of those 50 points that they put on Pacifica. I'm hoping that again this week he will be the beneficiary in fantasy of whatever points that they managed to put on the Force. And my third pick is Caleb Tangitau from the Highlanders. They're taking on the Pacifica. Again, I like the Highlanders in that matchup. I think they should be able to put a lot of points on that Pacifica leaky defense. And I'm thinking Tangitau, he will be the primary beneficiary of that. Some other guys to consider though. Andrew Callaway, he is back for the Waratahs. Not only that, he is back at fullback because Joseph Suali'i is out. I expect that means he will be the main strike weapon for the Tars, and they are up against the Drua at home in Sydney. So the Waratahs, that's a real opportunity for them to score some points there. Callaway, it's a tough pick for me. If I had to, I would probably drop Tangitau for Callaway. It's definitely close between those guys for me. Interested to know your thoughts on that. And I was talking about Tavatava Nawai before. In fantasy, you can see he is actually listed in the back 3. So everything I said before though, it still applies. I really don't think he's a great option for a back 3 pick. The major omission with my back 3 is that I don't have anyone from the Chiefs in there, even though I really do like the Chiefs to score points against the Brumbies this week. The reason for that is if you look at the Chiefs back 3 this week, it's Mackenzie at fullback, Nadawa on right wing, and Manasa Mataele on the left wing. But Mataele, I like the guy, but he is not listed in fantasy for whatever reason. We cannot pick him. And D-Mac, I already have him. I've made him my captain. And Nadawa, fantastic player, but again, he's another one of these guys who doesn't necessarily get rewarded in fantasy for all the work he puts in on the park. So that's why my back 3 doesn't feature any Chiefs this week. Still wouldn't begrudge you for picking up Nadawa as well. I don't think that is a bad pick at all. And some other guys that I think are serious options to consider. I mean, there is still Mark Talia. The Blues, they're having a horror run at the moment. They had a horror game against the Highlanders. Talia, he did not do that well. This game against the Hurricanes though, whether or not the Blues do pick things up or not, it's probably more likely to be a more open game. There might be more opportunity for those backs, particularly the outside backs, and particularly for a guy like Mark Talia. So definitely one to think about. And for the same reasons as well, those Cane backs, Kenny Naholo and Fingiana Nofo, might have good games, still solid players in general. If you do have thoughts about that Canes Blues matchup, if you know how that's gonna go, if you think the backs on one of those teams are gonna score points, those are your guys to look at. And lastly, just looking at the biggest outside back point scorer from last week. It was Finn Hurley, the fullback for the Highlanders, the newbie, getting 76 points. I'm really not sure if he is going to back up week on week and get those tries like he did last week. We'll have to wait and see. That Pacifica matchup, definitely not a bad time to pick him, but I don't have that kind of faith. Anyway, that's all my picks for this week. Hopefully you found it useful. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are, and I'll catch you next week for the recap.